For the first time since 1863, an American stood in court accused by the United States government of, quote, aiding the enemy. And today, a judge shocked a lot of people watching the case by finding Private Bradley Manning not guilty of that charge, which carried with it a possible life sentence. Manning was, however, convicted of 20 of the government's 22 charges. He'll be sentenced tomorrow, and despite being found not guilty of aiding the enemy, the most serious charge, he still faces over 100 years in prison. The judge agreed with the government almost every step of the way in the trial of Bradley Manning, but on the charge of aiding the enemy, she rejected the government's audacious line of thinking, which every American should be thankful for. You see, when Navy SEALs raided Osama bin Laden's compound in Pakistan in 2011, they managed to take a number of computers and files. When they went through those computers, the government claims they found digital files containing WikiLeaks cables that Bradley Manning leaked. Thus, the government argued members of al-Qaeda, likely Osama bin Laden himself, had read some of the WikiLeaks cables. And they were certainly not alone. I read many of those WikiLeaks cables, along with millions and millions of other people across the world. In fact, anyone with an internet connection could have read the WikiLeaks cables, and many did. But the government argued that the presence of cables leaked by Bradley Manning on those computers proved that he had knowingly aided the enemy. The government's legal reasoning was that because Manning released the documents that were subsequently published in the New York Times, for example, that he aided the enemy because he released the cables knowing that al-Qaeda could potentially have an internet connection and therefore read them. By that line of thinking, the New York Times or the Washington Post or even your humble MSNBC host could be prosecuted for aiding the enemy if, say, one of those papers' articles or maybe a clip from the show were found on an al-Qaeda computer. It's a genuinely shocking argument coming from the government, an argument that, for today at least, a judge rejected. Joining me now is Liza Goitein, co-director of the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center for Justice. Okay, am I being hyperbolic here? Can it possibly be the case that the government's assertion in the aiding the enemy charge was as massively problematic from a precedent perspective as it appears to be?
I don't think you're being hyperbolic. I think you're being underbolic. I'm not quite sure what the opposite of that is, because I don't think that the judge rejected that line of reasoning. I think what the judge said is, yes, government, you're right about where I should set the bar, but you didn't even get over that bar. So basically, the judge said if the government had proven that Bradley Manning knew that al-Qaeda was using the internet and was looking at websites like WikiLeaks beyond a reasonable doubt, then the government would have prevailed on that charge.
So this judge is saying there's nothing wrong with this legal theory. And again, I should be clear here. The full text of aiding the enemy statute: any person who aids or attempts to aid the enemy with arms, ammunition, supplies, money, or other things, or without proper authority, knowingly harbors or protects or gives intelligence to, or communicates or corresponds with, or holds any intercourse with the enemy, either directly or indirectly. The gives intelligence to here, we should be clear, this isn't even related to classified information, right?
That's right.
That could presumably be things even that are not classified if the government could prove its case that it gave intelligence to.
So the definition of intelligence that was used in this case was information that is helpful to the enemy, that is true, at least in part. And in fact, in closing arguments, the government made the argument that any information that casts the United States in a negative light could be helpful to the enemy because the enemy could use it to recruit new members. So by that theory, anyone who posts on the internet information that casts the United States in a negative light has knowingly given intelligence to al-Qaeda. I mean, I think somewhere even the judge, I guess, realized that this broke down. But unfortunately, until we can see her opinion, hopefully there will be a written opinion, and then we'll have a better sense of.
Yeah, so let's talk about the other charges. Let's talk about the espionage charges. Yes, under the Espionage Act, which is just a horrible law, passed in 1917, at this awful point in American politics, Red Scare, Palmer raids, all sorts of nuttiness going around. It's been rarely used. It's used in this case. Did the government have to show that Bradley Manning actually wanted to essentially act as a spy for him to be convicted on this?
Not at all. And it is a statute that was designed for spies. I don't like spies. I'm fine with putting spies in prison. The problem is that recently, and really only under this administration, has the government started to regularly use the Espionage Act to go after people for disclosing classified information, not to the enemy, but to the media, and not with any intent to harm the United States.
So rather than chalking a mailbox and ending up in a parking lot where you are with a double agent from a foreign intelligence service and you're slipping them a thumb drive or a dossier of documents, you go to the New York Times or you go to WikiLeaks or you go to some third outlet, and the government's now saying that second thing, not the classic thing that we understand as spying, that also counts as spying.
That counts under the Espionage Act. Now, as recently as 2006, there was a judge who said the government has to prove bad faith on the part of the defendant in order to get a conviction under the Espionage Act, because that's really what the intent requirement was supposed to be in the statute. But the judge in John Kiriakou's case rejected that. Judge Lind rejected that in Bradley Manning's case. And so we are seeing that the motive of the defendant...
Right, about the motive, exactly.
That's right.
Here's the final thing I want to get from you is this. You know, defenders of Bradley Manning have been quite vocal and active and very well organized, and I'm quite sympathetic in some ways to people's pointing out the absolute difficult to justify conditions under which Bradley Manning was held, 10 months of solitary, the 3 years before he faced trial, the overkill of the prosecution. But it also does seem to me the Army isn't going to walk away from some private first class giving away 800,000 documents, right? So my question to you is, as sentencing starts tomorrow and there is no minimum sentence, he faces 100 years, what do you think justice is in this case?
I think justice is to take into account those very things that were considered irrelevant. I think they shouldn't have been considered irrelevant, but they were considered irrelevant at the guilt phase, and that is his actual motive and the actual harm that the disclosures caused, or in this case really didn't cause. And those factors will be relevant at the sentencing hearing, and I think some sentence is appropriate. I actually believe that.
And he has pled to a sentence that would give him about 20 years, and I have to say 20 years.
Up to 20 years, yeah.
Up to 20 years, and to say, I mean, I'm not a sentencing judge, but clearly that would be a disincentive for future actions if that's the thing the Army is worried about. Liza Goitein from the Brennan Center for Justice, thank you.
Thank you.
After a riot in a nice seaside community in California, the question really must be asked, are white youths out of control? A very special all-in discussion coming up.